Hi, thank you, Ruth. I know my name's on the title there. I am Claire Doney. Sorry, with Get Echo. I'd like to also introduce the team that are here with me as well. So I've got Cara behind us, who's one of our cancer care coordinators. Okay. So we were lucky enough to be involved in the CPES Improvement Collaborative last year, and we realised that we'd like to have a more consistent way to hear from our cancer patients and staff about their experiences. It's fantastic getting the national feedback, but we wanted to be able to respond to that in a more timely manner. We wanted it to be achievable for all, so came up with the idea of 5 for 5, which really means you take 5 minutes to ask 5 questions. We actually produced a video as part of the Improvement Collaborative and thought it would be useful to include that in our presentation today. I think it sums up nicely what we've been doing, and it's just for a few minutes. So if we could possibly play that, please, and then I'll talk about the programme again after that. Thank you. Yeah, and I can just move on. Following the video, times have moved on actually. So this was all pre-COVID, of course, and we all know that we're now in a bit of a different world. So as I move through the presentation, I will talk about where this came from and the principles, but actually at the end, I'm more going to focus on where we are now and how we've managed to adapt this in terms of making this even more relevant. So the following slide after the video will just summarise that. There's a lot of detail on there, but because they're getting shared, I won't go into any of that detail. And I suppose it's important to point out during the video that patients have been included in this all the way through as well. So we've actually had patient representation on our, well, initially the Improvement Collaborative, then the subsequent steering group, and still very heavily involved with this. And they're a really good sounding board to make sure that every question we ask is run past, you know, our patients, and they give us some really strong feedback, which is really good. I think sometimes, particularly when we're asking surveys, we're used to using a certain language in hospitals, and I think sometimes it's really good to have that sounding board. Super, yeah. So this is a slide I was mentioning that actually summarises the video. So I'll very briefly, there's a lot of information on this, very briefly go through. So the principles were having sustained patient engagement. It's actually a rolling survey, so a rolling programme. It's standardised across all tumour sites as well, because what we heard back from our clinical teams is it's very hard to find the time sometimes to dedicate to a tumour-specific survey to hear back from the patients. We wanted real-time interventions. So some of the themes of the questions we're asking are based on CPES, but not the same questions. We use it as a guide to think where we need to focus our attention. It's in a digital format as well as a paper format, but I'll talk to that a little bit later. We have reporting analysis and of course a PDSA cycle. You can see on there from the steering group, we've actually still got community GP representation on there. We've got executive representation, Cancer Alliance engagement leaders with us, and also one of our associate directors of nursing as well. We also collaborate in terms of feeding back and communicating with secondary care, primary care, community sector, voluntary sector, so really try and share the learning across the patch and with the Alliance. So if we're asking questions of our cancer patients, you know, other cancer patients may be feeling the same. Go on to the next slide, please. I wasn't as animated, by the way, there is the video. That would have been far more exciting. So we've got an established and well-represented steering group, as I've just mentioned. We do think it's important to have it integrated into the Macmillan Cancer Information Support Centres as well as a hub. I've talked about co-design there, but what's also quite key, we wanted to have relevant training and education running parallel to each set of questions, so the theme of the survey. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we've started the survey at the start of COVID-19, so that hasn't caught up, but that's still part of our plan to do that. And also the same messages will be focused on the Macmillan Information and Support Centre, so if we know it's an area where we've perhaps scored weakly in the NCPES, which was around financial support was one example, we can really do some targeted work. And also to make sure we follow that communication strategy for sharing information. So to talk a little bit about the governance structure, we wanted to make sure this formally sat and had some weighting, so we created a new steering group that includes patient experience, which is the Patient Experience and Personalised Care Steering Group, and we intentionally put patient experience at the start of that. So we actually have a number of subgroups that feed into that group, but one of those is the co-production group that we're talking about, the Cancer Information and Support co-production group. That's where we'd set the questions, we'd set the format, we'd have the rolling programme, and we'd feed the results up. But what's really key is we then feed from there into the cancer locality groups as well. And it's really important to have that executive and senior buy-in to really raise the profile of how important the feedback is. Okay, so the 5 for 5 programme is now live. As I say, we've completed the second survey. Because our launch date happened to coincide with a global pandemic, we actually changed our full first set of questions and adapted it to make it about communication during COVID. So the change in the ways we communicated with our cancer patients. I think because we have so much control over the questions, we've realised the benefit of being able to iterate the programme in response, which has just been invaluable, to be honest, to really get that patient voice. The survey is fully digital because we're using iPads with full infection control support to enable access for all, so we can take those into outpatient areas, chemotherapy units, but also we could provide it in a paper format if somebody felt they couldn't use that. But at the minute, obviously, we're steering away from that. The future meetings are all planned now for the next 12 months ahead. The governance structure's embedded. So that was all new, but I think, that's really now just part of what we do. And some of our early findings, although we've only done 2 surveys, I thought it might be really useful just to share some snippets. One is the difference in opinion we're seeing between staff perception and patient perception. Our patients are reporting they're overwhelmingly, satisfied with their care. Obviously we're getting some good feedback within that, some rich data, but staff, however, are feeling less satisfied. So we do need to explore that more, but it's really interesting that we've even found that out. And we know we've seen a shift in acceptable communication methods due to COVID-19. So during our improvement collaborative, we did look briefly at communication methods and sought some feedback. Then when we've sought that again as a result of COVID-19, we've seen there's an increase in how people want us to communicate with them, as in digitally via email. So that's been quite interesting. There is some inconsistent engagement in this across tumour groups, which we also need to explore, which could be due to a number of factors, which could include workload or team absence and things, but we do need to look into that. But so far, it's been invaluable what we've found out. It's also increased the profile of cancer patient experience. I mentioned that in terms of the governance structure, but actually being able to, we talk about CPES, but people are used to hearing about that, I suppose. It's given us another tool. It's additional data that we can actually triangulate with what we're already finding out through the trust with, friends and family and CPES, and really makes it more local and specific to be able to do some targeted interventions. And I think, again, the opportunity to use the process of 5 for 5 to gather feedback as the need arises. So another example of that would be the chemotherapy unit. We've had to move locations of our 2 chemotherapy units in the region because of trying to keep them on clean sites. And we've been able to, come up with some questions that we've been advised with our patients to ask about how does that feel? How, what more could we be doing for you? And actually it's fantastic now to have the tool to do that and be responsive. So yeah, so actually in summary, 5 for 5 is taking 5 minutes to ask 5 questions. It's listening, responding to our cancer service users and staff in a timely way. And I'd just also like to point out, we have been asked recently by a patient to also make this about carers and how can we learn more from our carers. So that's another avenue that we're going to start looking at as well. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.